Great morning everyone. I am Honey P. Parpa and today we are going to discuss about the natural law as a universal formula. A universal formula which contains in brief an expression of the whole natural law is this: keep the moral order or observe right order in your actions. Some writers state it simply as do good and avoid evil. Now, the right orders of human acts consist evidently in the proper direction to man's last end, which is subjectively one's perfect beatitude and objectively God Himself. God must direct His free creatures to their last end. Hence, God commands them to observe the moral order and forbids them to depart from it. So, what is natural and ethical for a human person is to keep the moral order, to observe right order, to do good and avoid evil, to preserve one's being. Suicide and murder work against preservation of human life, therefore are a violation of the natural law. It means that there is moral order built into human nature that help us know right from wrong. The basic rule of this law is simple: do good and avoid evil. These ideas shows that humans are naturally directed towards what is good for them, especially the preservation of life and the pursuit of happiness in God. Saint Thomas Aquinas grounded the directedness of nature in God. All of creation is directed toward their final end, God Himself. To direct us to God, the Lord gave the divine law. The divine law given to us in the Ten Commandments of the Old Testament and the New Testament of love God and love your neighbor, by Jesus Christ in the New Testament, in which Saint Thomas synthesized faith and reason. Aquinas believed that natural law is part of the divine law, that the natural law shares in the internal law. All of creation is directed. So, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, everything in creation has a purpose given by God, and the purpose of human life is to reach the final end, which is God Himself. That's why moral actions are those that help us move toward that goal, while immoral actions take us away from it. For example, acts like murder or suicide go against natural law because they destroy life, which is a gift meant to be protected. Aquinas also said that natural law is part of the divine law, which is God's eternal plan to the world. God revealed the divine law more clearly through the Ten Commandments and through Jesus Christ teaching love God and love your neighbor. This shows that faith and reason work together. Reason helps us see natural and moral truths, and faith helps us understand more deeply. Analogous to logical reasoning, it may be applied as follows. Premise: stealing is immoral and evil to be avoided. Second premise: the act of taking people's property without their consent is stealing. Conclusion: therefore, the act of taking someone's property, which I actually intend to do, is immoral and an evil to be avoided, which I should do avoid. By using this kind of reasoning, we can make moral decisions that respect both nature and God's law. Thank you.
Law defined. According to St. Thomas, law defined as an ordinance of reason for the common good made by him who has care of the community and promulgated. In short, for St. Thomas law is reasonable rule made for the good of all by someone in authority and made known to everyone. For a law to be a law, it must have the four requisites, namely, number 1, ordinance of reason; 2, for the common good; and 3, promulgation; and 4, the last is by one who has charge of the community. Thank you.
A law must be a product of reason, not purely of emotion. When the heart rules the mind, we can be highly unreasonable. A law is promulgated for the common good because we are meant to be social. We belong to a community. A law that favors the male gender at the expense of the female gender cannot be a law. A law must be promulgated by one whose primary task is to care for the people, the community. The primary task of our lawmakers is to care for and protect their people by legislating laws for the common good. The law must be made known or communicated to all people to ensure correct understanding and compliance. A law that is promulgated does not take effect immediately. In the Philippines, laws take effect after 15 days following the completion of the publication in the official gazette or a newspaper of general circulation unless it is otherwise provided.
Right afternoon, my name is Hurricane Kerbin, and this afternoon I'm going to discuss Immanuel Kant theory. Immanuel Kant theory of rights emphasizes that human rights are rooted in the inherent dignity of every person and are derived from reason, not external factors like utility or social conversations. Example: imagine you are trying to decide whether you cheat on a test. Then Kant's ideas is like having a little angel on your shoulder asking, "What if everyone cheated on tests at all time?" If that happened, grade would be meaningless and no one would actually learn anything. It would be a mess. Are you using your classmates and teachers? Cheating isn't fair to those who studied hard, and it disrespects your teacher effort to teach you. So Kant point it's all about being a good human by thinking about the bigger picture, not just not just what you want right now, but what kind of world you creating with your actions. Respecting others recognize that everyone deserves everyone deserves fair, fairness and honesty. It's like the golden rules, but with a philosophical twist. Do things that would make the world a better place if everyone did then and always treat people with the respect they deserve. That's all. Thank you.
We're talking about Kant's deontological ethics. Kant's ethic is now referred as deontological. When we say deontological, it focuses on the inherent rightness or wrongness of action themselves rather than their consequences. So it's concerned with duties, roles, and moral obligation. The term deontological has its root from the Greek deon, which means duty. Hence, deontological ethics focuses on duty, obligation, and rights instead of consequences or ends. An act that proceeds from the will, which wills it because it can be the will of all, is a right action. Willing and doing the will of all is a duty, regardless of the consequences. Following clarifies Kant's duty-based approach. The duty-based approach, sometimes called deontological ethics, argued that doing what is right is not about the consequences of our actions, ultimately have no control, but about having the proper intention in performing the action. The ethical action is one taken from duty. That is, it is done precisely because it is our obligation to perform the action. Ethical obligations are the same for all rational creatures. They are universal, and knowledge of what this obligation entails is arrived at by discovering rules of behavior that are not contradicted by something over which we reason. So, in this Kant's deontological ethics, to make this short, Here is the example. The example is borrowing money with no intention to pay back cannot be universalized and cannot be ethical. If this becomes universalized, there will be no more lenders and all banks will close. In this example, it's simply the action is borrowing money with no intention to pay it back. The maxim is it's okay to borrow money without intending to pay it back. So, the universal law is if everyone did this, lending would cease to exist. So, conclusion, the action is not morally justifiable.
In the duty of framework, we focus on the duties and obligations that we have in a given situation and consider what ethical obligations we have and what thing we should never do. Ethical conduct is defined by going one duties and doing the right thing, and the goal is performing the correct action. Ethical is the moral framework that emphasizes the importance of following rules, principles, or duties regardless of the consequences. To those actions, we have focused on duties and obligations that we have in a given situation and consider what ethical obligations we have and what things we should never do.
Freedom as the basis of right. Kant said right is the sum of the condition under which the choice of one can be united with the choice of another in accordance with the universal law. This means everyone has the equal right to freedom to make their own choices as long as doing so doesn't stop others from being free. Universal law. For an action or law to be moral, it must be possible for everyone to follow it without contradiction. So a right is something that everyone could have at the same time without harming others' right. Autonomy and respect. Every person is an end and themselves, not a means to someone else's goals. Therefore, we must respect the freedom and dignity of others, and never use people merely for your own purpose. Innate right to freedom. Kant believed all humans are born with one innate right, the right to be free. All other rights, like property rights or political rights, are built upon the basic freedom. External versus internal freedom. Internal freedom, freedom of thought and moral will. Internal freedom, the ability to act in the world without being forced by others. This is what legal rights protect.
Legally and morally right. The relationship between what is legally right and what is morally right is complex. It is not always the case that something that is legal is also moral, or that something that it's moral is also legal. According to Immanuel Kant, for an action to be truly right, it must be both legal and moral. In Kant's view, what is legal must also be moral. A legally right action aligns with universal law and the categorical imperative. However, the slide highlights that legality does not always equate to morality. Adhering to legal requirements like states or country laws is considered as legal. Morality goes beyond mere legal compliance, encompassing actions that exceed legal requirements such as helping others in need. Like for example, it is legal to pay employees the minimum wage. And the other one is it is more than legal to pay them more out of care and concerned about their needs, and that is moral. In summary, while legality focused on adherence to confined laws, morality delves into the ethical considerations that may extend beyond legal obligations.
Bright morning everyone. So I'm going to report goodwill. Goodwill can say nothing can possible be conceived in the world or even out of it, which can be called good without classification except a good will. Kant's criteria of framework of what is right or wrong is good will and acts. It's said to be right or wrong depending on whether it is done with or without goodwill. The rightness or wrongness of an action depend on one's goodwill or intention, that usually criteria or weakness. Cited regarding this concept is that the road to hell is paved with good intention is goodwill enough. So, ayon kay Kant, walang bagay sa mundo na maituturing na talagang mabuti maliban sa goodwill. And then, ang goodwill kuno ang basehan ni Kant sa kung ano ang tama o mali. That's all.
Categorical imperative. Kant holds that the fundamental principle of our moral duties is a categorical imperative. It is an imperative because it is a command addressed to agents who could follow it but might not. For example, leave the gun, take the cannoli. It is a categorical in virtue of applying to us unconditionally or simply because we possess rational wills without reference to any ends that we might or might not have. It does not, in other words, apply to us on the condition that we have antecedently adopted some goal for ourselves. To serve the will as a principle, Kant has two versions of the categorical imperative. The first version states, I ought never to act except in such a way that I could also will that my maxim should become a universal law. If one cannot wish or want that a certain rule of or maxim becomes the maxim of all, that it is not right to follow it. For instance, one cannot will that thou shalt steal becomes a rule to be followed by all because others may ultimately and steal one's property. One cannot wish that killing becomes the maxim of all because one would not, of course, wish that someone will come to kill that person. This is the principle which motivates a good will, and which Kant holds to be the fundamental principle of all morality.
The second version of the moral law. Today I'll be discussing the second version of Immanuel Kant's moral law, which says, always treat humanity, whether in your own person or that of another. Never simplify as a means, but always at the same time as an end. This principle emphasizes that the value and dignity of every human being. Kant tells us that people should never be used merely as tools to achieve our own goals. Instead, we should treat them each person as someone who has their own purpose, dreams, and worth. For example, if we only befriend someone because we want something from them, like help, money, or popularity, we are treating them as a means. But if we respect and care for them genuinely, regardless of what they can give us, we treat them as an end. Kant's ideas remind us that moral action came from respect, not from selfish reasons. It means doing the right thing, simplify because it is the right, and because we value others as fellow human beings. This encourages fairness, empathy, and ethical relationship in society.
The second principle is known as ought implies can. This means that if we are morally required to do something, it must be also be something we are capable of doing. In simple terms, we cannot be obligated to do the impossible. For example, if someone is told that they ought to help, it assumes that they can help, that they have the freedom, ability, or means to do it. Kant believed that moral responsibility only applies when a person has the freedom to choose and the power to act. Joseph Fletcher,
A situation ethics author also used this idea to explain that moral obligation is connected to freedom. In other words, the more freedom we have, the more responsible we become for our own actions. We can only be held accountable for what we can freely and voluntarily do. So, this principle connects morality with human freedom. It teaches us that being moral is not just about following rules, it's about using our freedom and ability to choose what is right.